All right, so I just want to welcome Dr. Brent Crane, who is here today with us. He is the consumer horticulture educator for the Michigan State University Extension. We are so happy to have you here today, and I am going to go ahead and pass everything over to you.
All right, well, I'm very glad to be here, and I don't know if people can see me. I can't see myself on there. But I wanted to give a quick shout out to Elaine. I saw that you joined us. So Elaine is one of my diagnostic responders. So if you call the lawn and garden hotline, you are likely to have Elaine answer that call. So thank you so much for joining. All right. So we're going to talk about deer-resistant gardening. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that all of MSU programming is open to everyone, and we make that a core point of our mission as a land grant university is to bring the knowledge that has been gained through innovative research and to make it accessible to everyone. So as we're going through the talk today, we'll be looking at what the problem is in terms of deer and gardening, some deer biology and behavior, some favorite plants, and then things that you can do. So smart plants, smart repellents, and smart barriers that can help with the deer problem. So the problem with deer is that they don't obey signs. They won't stay where you tell them to, no matter how much you try. They'll show up in your yard, they're looking for food, and sometimes just a place to hang out. They don't always make the best guess, however. So damage to trees and shrubs, as I'm sure you've seen, can be especially bad in winter when the food is scarce and they might strip the bark off of trees for food. And yes, that one deer in the back was about to go take a few bites out of that shrub, and in fact did in the couple photos that I'm not showing. All right, but there's more to this problem. So that's habitat loss. So when the first European explorers arrived, there were approximately 15,000 Native Americans living in what is present-day Michigan. Now we have a population of over 10 million people. So think about the impact on animal populations. Animal habitat around the population centers, it's not just more limited, it's also disjointed. So I live in the south part of Lansing, and just a year ago, the city completed a new paved path that bisects animal habitat. It sections off a wooded area from open fields. Now, deer prefer mixed habitat where there's woods for cover, there's meadows, fields, brush, varied food sources. And when it's disjointed like that, it's very stressful to animals, and that stress can make them more susceptible to diseases that they would otherwise tolerate. Along with the less land being available, the populations of deer can be very high, both in rural areas and urban areas. And this is a map showing the density of deer by county. So where you see the green areas, that's over 45. If you look at Washtenaw there in the bottom is yellow, so that's 30 to 45 deer per square mile. This data is about 10 years old. I couldn't find the newer map on it, but I'm sure it's pretty similar. So because deer can eat a wide variety of plants, there is plenty of food to support those populations, except during the winter when the food can be scarce. Now, if you look up in the Upper Peninsula, you'll notice that the densities are lower, and that's where the white is, and there's less than 15 deer per mile in some areas. A large part of that is that there are healthy populations of predators that we don't see as commonly downstate. So we have coyotes here, but not as many. There's coyotes, black bear, bobcats, wolves, predators that will keep those deer populations in check. But with less natural habitat, few natural predators, and high populations, that sets the stage for Sunday brunch at your garden cafe. So I have a friend who took this picture, Sarah, and she loves to look into the eyes of that deer, and she'll tell you this. She'll say, look deep into their eyes and ask, why do you eat my plants? And you know, I mean, they really are beautiful animals, and we enjoy having them around. My kids love having them around, but they really cause a lot of damage as well. And part of this is figuring out what's our tolerance. You know, what is it that we really want? And is there some way that we can create a system that works for us, and maybe for the deer, maybe not for the deer, depending on whether you like them around or not. So let's talk about deer anatomy. If you look at the diagram, they have incisors in the lower jaw, but they don't have any teeth in the upper jaw. So they can't bite cleanly like rodents can, and that's one way that you can tell if the damage was caused by deer or if it was caused by a rodent, such as a rabbit or a squirrel. So deer will pull out or bite off pieces of plants and trees, and they uproot annuals. Here is a classic image of what we call hosta celery sticks. So deer have torn the leaves off and they leave the stalks behind. And you can see, note those ragged tears at the top where they've just torn the leaves off and how it looks like celery sticks. Deer are similar to cows in that they have a 4-chambered stomach, and that allows them to process all kinds of plant material. They've been known to eat hundreds of different kinds of plants, including cacti. This makes them incredibly adaptable and very difficult to outmaneuver. So let's take a look at some of their favorites. Cedars, arborvitae, and yews. See, these are like deer candy. Junipers are a good alternative. Deer will still eat them if they're hungry enough, but some of these things, deer cannot resist things like arborvitae and yews. But the junipers, those have a strong scent, a bitter taste, and sharp needles, and as a result, deer tend to not prefer those. All right, here are some more favorites. Of course, hostas, as we mentioned, daylilies. Oh, they like beautiful plants. So they like pretty stuff, just like we do. They like the tulips and the rhododendrons, the roses. They love newly planted annuals, and they truly appreciate that extra effort that you went to bring them fresh produce by planting those new annuals. They also love fruit trees and lots of different kinds of deciduous trees, but in particular, they love that fruity. They love the apples and the fruit itself, and they also, especially in the winter, they like that bark. It's it's a sweeter wood. So another type of damage, of course, is deer rub. And so you'll see this damage usually towards the bottom part of the trunk on smaller trees, maybe 1 to 3 inch diameter trees. And the deer will rub their antlers off against the trunk of these small trees to remove the velvet in the fall. But then they come back and they do this again to show dominance during the rut. And then they come back and it helps them shed their antlers in late winter. So they actually get there's 3 different reasons they might be rubbing on the tree. And that means that when you think about when to protect that tree, you have to think through that entire section from early fall through late winter where they could be damaged. So what can we do to fight back against deer if we want to fight back? Or I guess in some cases, people like to keep them around also. But what we can do, we can choose smart plants that deer don't like, smart repellents to deter the deer, and smart barriers to block them physically. So looking first at smart plants. So make smart plant choices. Pick the plants that deer tend to avoid. Now you can also have plants that they like, and you can put those in one section of your garden if you want to give opportunity for the deer to be there and to just stay in one area. But in the places where you don't want them, pick the plants that they tend to avoid. When they're hungry enough, they will eat pretty much anything, but there are certain ones that they don't like as much. You can also take your favorites and put those in containers, put them on decks, put them somewhere that the deck don't go, or that the deer don't go to, rather. All right, so here's some characteristics of plants that they don't like. So they don't prefer ones that are smelly. They don't like ones that are fuzzy or leathery or coarse or spiky. They don't like ones that are grass-like. They'll graze, but they don't like the ornamental grasses that are like those thin stalks. They just don't like that. And a lot of toxic plants they will avoid, but not all of them. So by smelly, I don't mean that these things stink. So think about something like lavender. It smells beautiful, but it can overpower their senses. So remember, they rely on their sense of smell to detect when predators are around. So their noses are way more sensitive than ours are. Let's take advantage of that. Plant things like this lavender and plant a lot of it, not just one. You can have a complete deer-resistant garden by planting an herb garden. Many of the herbs that we enjoy, they don't like. It's too strong of a smell for them. You could also add smelly borders. And again, these aren't necessarily things that smell bad to us, but things that have strong scent that the deers won't like. If you plant that around the border, that can often keep them out of the areas that you don't want them in. And a good example of that is something like chive and garlic. And these, I mean, I think chive flowers are very pretty, and you can also use those to decorate salads or put on the side of a dish or something. They're edible. Another a deer-resistant bulb, anything in the allium family. So these beautiful ornamental alliums with huge blooms, the deer don't prefer those. So let's talk about flowers that stink. And again, that means that they stink to the deer. So things like yarrow, zinnia, tansy, marigold, bee balm, another one of my favorites for, Artemisia, anything in the mint family. And if we talk about fuzzy or leathery plants, so if you think about cone flowers, I know a lot of us don't think of cone flowers as being fuzzy, but if you look at the stems, look at the leaves, and you'll see what I mean. Other things like foxglove, poppies, lamb's ear, irises, aloes. So here's an example. See, deer kind of have texture issues, so they don't like how these fuzzy things feel on their tongue. And I like to liken it to my wife. She doesn't like ice cream with chocolate chips in it, whereas I love chocolate chips. So if there's another kind of ice cream that doesn't have the chocolate chips in it, she'll eat that. But if you run out of that other kind and she wants ice cream, she will eat the one with chocolate chips. And deer are a lot like that. They don't like the fuzzy ones, but they will chew on them if they're not finding other things that they like. So some other fuzzy ones, something like silvery sage, mullein. Here again is the rudbeckia and the echinacea, so the different cone flowers. And again, they'll eat these if they're hungry enough, but they don't tend to do substantial damage to them, even if they come and gnaw on them and kind of graze on them a little bit. Other ones with leathery leaves, Bergenia, sedum, peonies, or if you get to really leathery, and here we're getting into not just leathery, but spiky. So sometimes things like aloes, and these are annuals. You have to protect them in the winter. But there's also things like agave, and there are some agave that are hardy to zone 5, as well as a lot of cacti. So there's actually a lot of options that could be planted in Michigan that just don't tend to be planted for a variety of reasons. And I mentioned ornamental grasses. They don't like the ornamental grasses. Here's another one, the blue oak grass. So let's talk about some of the poisonous plants that they don't like. So daffodils, crown imperials, buttercups, castor beans. These are all things that typically they don't bother too much. And castor bean in particular can be quite dramatic and beautiful. Now the seeds do contain ricin, which is toxic, very toxic. So that's something to be aware of. Typically, it's not, the rest of the plant is not toxic. It's not something that's all that dangerous. If you are concerned about the seeds, though, you can always cut off the flowers when they're just about spent and they haven't gone to seed or something like that. So there are also vegetables that they sometimes leave alone. So if there's other things, then they'll generally eat those other things. But like hot and sweet peppers, and yes, they will come through. I've had them eat my peppers, but they tend to not bother them as much as some other things. The cucurbit, so watermelon, cantaloupe, cucumbers, rhubarb, and then, as we mentioned before, many herbs. All right, so let's talk about smart repellents to deter deer. So you've seen these different repellents in the shelves in the garden centers, and maybe you've made up some of your own homemade ones. These are things that typically have a bad taste, or they have a bad scent, or there are things that you can do that have scare and fear techniques. So things where there's sound and there's movement and there's light that just kind of throws them off guard and they don't feel quite as comfortable. So talking about the bad taste and smell, those are things like, they tend to smell bad to humans too, right? So these are things like rotten eggs and putrid egg solids and capsicum pepper and garlic. Or dead animal scents and predator urine, all these wonderful things that really don't smell good to any of us. Now, the thing about these, and for those who've tried it, you know that most of these have to be reapplied regularly, especially after rain. They tend to wash right off. And the other thing is that deer get accustomed to them quite readily. But by rotating through several different products early in the season, you can train deer to stay out of certain areas. So that's a really good way to use these products, is to think of it that you're early on, you're training the deer where they can go and where they can't go. And that will make your job easier later in the year. So more scare techniques. So there are various things that are motion activated. So there are motion activated things that send out noises like a barking dog, or that activate a high power sprayer that will start spraying in the direction of the sound. There's different things that you can use. If you do use something that's ultrasonic, just be aware that it tends to be the same frequencies that will bother other animals. So if you have a dog, or you have neighbors that have a dog or a cat or chinchilla or whatever, then just be aware that you probably don't want to be using those ultrasonic devices. Another thing that works well is a dog who spends a lot of time outdoors. So if you have or a pet in general, if you have a big dog or a crocodile or something, I hope you don't have a crocodile. But if you have some kind of pet that's outdoors, that can certainly be a good deterrent. And if you combine different things, you can get a truly integrated approach. So if you use some of those sprays to kind of tell them where to go, use one of these motion sensing things, or something that moves or spins or something, then you can just kind of keep them off their game, where they're less likely to really take an interest in what you bring them. All right, let's talk about smart barriers. So here we're talking about excluding them from a space. So you can fence off your entire property or individual plants. You can also utilize enclosed structures or tight spaces. See, tight spaces make deer uncomfortable. They don't like going into narrow areas. They're not sure if they can get out of it. So if they're used to going through like a narrow space in a hedge, that's one thing, because they know what's on the other side. But if they don't know what's on the other side, it makes them uncomfortable. So fencing options, you can use a high tensile wire, sometimes electric, it doesn't have to be. You can use a woven wire, and we say an 8-foot minimum. So a running deer can jump 12 feet at least, but deer don't have the best eyesight, and they're not likely to risk jumping an 8-foot wire fence because they don't know if it's higher than what it looks, because they can see that there's individual strands of wire and they're not really sure where the top one is, like where it ends. That's different than if you're using something like a solid wood fence, where they can tell where the top of that is. Another option is double fencing, sometimes called offset fencing, or electric fence. All right, so here's the high tensile wire fence. And I think, yeah, that's the one that I was just kind of talking about. I thought that you had that on the screen, just realized you didn't. But yeah, so they can't really tell where the top of that is, because so their eyesight allows them to see 300 degrees around them, but it doesn't allow them to see very clearly. So it is confusing for them when you have these wire fences. And if you have a wood fence and they're jumping over it, you can also add a wire or two above that, and it'll make them recognize that there's something up above there that they don't want to get tangled up in. All right, so here's an example of a fully fenced in garden with a combination of woven wire, wood, and chain link fence. There's plenty of different options that you can use for fencing. And as I mentioned, deer don't like being trapped in a small space. And that's the magic behind this double or offset fence. So this image is a little hard to understand, so I've color coded it for your reference to try to make it a little easier to see what's going on. So there's in the back, there's a 2-wire fence. It's only 3.5 feet high, and I've marked those wires in blue, and those are attached to the fence post in the back. And then there's a second 1-wire fence that's run in front of that first fence. It's 3 feet out in front of it, and the wire is only about 2.5 feet high. And that single wire fence is indicated in yellow. So what happens is that the deer approaches that first wire, and they see those other wires behind it, and it creates this 3-dimensional illusion that's confusing to the deer. They don't want to be stuck in this small space, and they're not exactly sure how many wires there are and where those wires are. So they tend to just leave that alone. Now they certainly can and do go through or around these things sometimes, but in general, it makes it less likely that they're going to enter that space. And it's really, really easy to set something like this up. And because their vision's not that bad, it's nice sometimes to make sure that those wires are kind of visible. Maybe hang some things from them, every 5 feet or something. Just something dangling there so that they can see that there's a wire there. And if they're running, they don't just run right into those wires. All right, so here's an example of a fully enclosed garden, and this one includes screening on top, which is great because you don't want the deer to jump over and into it, which that's kind of a joke. They wouldn't really do that, but it's nice because it will keep out other things. So it'll keep out birds that might come in, or raccoons, or other things like that. Now this one looks like it's might be made with that black deer fence. So that if you've seen that black plastic deer fencing, the issue with that is that it's not very easy for deer to see, because that black, just like it blends in for us, so it's easy for us to see through, it's also easy for the deer to see through. And a lot of times if a deer is running, they think they're getting chased by something. I've seen them run right through that deer fencing, and sometimes they rip it up and get tangled up in it. So if you're using something like this that's going to be pretty invisible to a deer, then again, putting some white flags along that fence, maybe about 3 feet off the ground periodically, it'll make it a lot more visible for the deer. And you can also enclose individual plants with simple boxes that you can build yourself. These don't have to be expensive, they don't have to be difficult. You decide how pretty it needs to look for where you are. But it's pretty easy and straightforward to build some of these, especially if you want to do like a temporary shelter for your favorite evergreen during the winter, when they're likely to come nibbling on it as other food sources are more scarce. You can also use burlap, and that can be used to wrap trunks, which it also gives it protection against things like voles that will come and girdle trunks, rabbits, and also the sun and the wind that will come and hit the trunk in the winter. And don't forget to protect young trees, especially fruit trees. Like I said, they really like fruit trees. A lot of animals really love chewing on the bark of fruit trees and then nibbling on the branches. And so you'll want to make sure that you protect those by some kind of fence or the tree wraps, or both. So here's a traditional electric fence. And these fences, these are highly effective even in areas with high deer pressure. And these are the larger commercial fences. It's really an overkill for the home garden, and it's prohibited in many municipalities. So if you're going to use an electric fence of any kind, you really should check and make sure that it's allowed where you are. There is also a polytape option, and this doesn't use multiple wires like that. This uses a single strand of a bright yellow or orange electrified wire that the deer are apparently attracted to, just a single strand, and they will walk up to it and they get a jolt, and it's not enough typically to harm them, but it's enough to shock them, to teach them to stay out of that area. And that can be pretty effective in areas that have like a low to medium deer pressure. If you have a ton of deer around and there's competition for food, that single wire approach, the polytape, is probably not going to work all that well. Another one that you may have heard of is the peanut butter option. And this again uses a single strand of electrified wire. Sometimes people use multiple strands, but you can use a single strand and attach aluminum foil or fold it and put it over it, and then put some peanut butter on the aluminum foil. And what happens is that deer will lick the peanut butter, and just like with that polytape, they learn quickly to leave it alone. It works best in areas with a low deer pressure. It's one of those things where it might work for you, it might not. It's worth trying out if you want to, just because it's pretty easy to set up. And you can also put a line lower for smaller animals if you have trouble with like woodchucks, raccoons, rabbits, things like that. And then electric fences, now they're a lot easier to install than they used to be. You can get them in rolls like this, where it's just a woven roll, sometimes with the stakes already attached to it, and you just roll it out and push the stakes in as you're going. So it's super easy and fast to install. But again, if you want to invest in something electric, make sure it's allowed if you live in a city or near one. All right, and then we have some examples of just other additional enclosures that you can use, just physical structures that physically block them. And these can be complicated and fancy, or they can be simple. Here's an example where it goes from greenhouses to various hoop houses. Now, hoop houses can range from simple to very complex, and they can extend your growing season as well as provide protection from deer. So I take 20-foot pieces of PVC. I think I use 3/4 inch PVC, and I stick some 1/2 inch metal, the metal EMT tube cut into like 2-foot lengths. I pound those into the ground every 5 feet, and then stick the bent over PVC just onto those upright EMT stakes that I've driven in the ground. So it just slides right on top. I just fold it over. It makes this like 10-foot arc. And then I throw clear plastic sheeting over the top. So it doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. It's just a really simple and inexpensive way to make some of these things work. All right. And I went through this material a lot faster than I was expecting to, so we'll have lots of time for questions. I want to let you know about a couple resources we have. So this is our Gardening in Michigan website. So if you go here, it's MI, as in Michigan, garden.msu.edu, or you can just Google Gardening in Michigan, MSU. And this website comes up with all kinds of information that you can browse through. We have, I mentioned smart gardening a few times. We have smart gardening tip sheets on all kinds of different topics. So if you're interested in starting a vegetable garden, or if you want to know how to make your lawn grow healthier, or you want to know about soil testing or deterring deer or other animals, we have tip sheets on these different topics that are on this website. The other really nice thing about this website, if you look there in the center, I don't know if you can read it on your screen, but it says Ask an Expert partway down there. So if you click on Ask an Expert, that will allow you to enter questions online. And it can be a question about any kind of topic. You can ask about your lawn. You can say, hey, my neighbor raises pigs, and there's water with pig sewer running off their yard into mine. I don't know what to do about it. Who can I talk to? You can upload up to 3 photos and submit those. And we actually have a group of wranglers at MSU Extension who will look at your question as it comes in, and we get an average of one every 30 minutes throughout the year. And as that question comes in, they look at it and they will route it to the relevant expert on campus. So if you're asking about bees, it'll go to Anna Heck. If you're asking about a problem with your conifers, there's a good chance it'll go to me. If it's about lawns, it'll go to one of our lawn experts. So there's different people that it will go to. So it's a really great resource to use, and I highly recommend that you take advantage of that. There's also information on the website about our lawn and garden hotline, where you can call that 800 number, and one of our volunteers, like Elaine, who I mentioned at the beginning, will take that call and help you with answers to all sorts of different lawn and garden questions that you might have. So the other thing I would ask that you do, and this is completely voluntary, but if you follow this link or you use the QR code on your phone to go to this link, it's a very simple demographic form. And this just helps us to keep track of some basic information, and it's not connected to you in any way at all. But it will help us know the different demographics of people who are coming to our program. And this is really helpful when we go and we talk to federal agencies and other sponsors to raise money for our programs. They like to see really diverse audiences. And so it's good to be able to show them that we're able to reach people from diverse backgrounds in our programming. So with that, I will go ahead and entertain any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Brent. That was such helpful information. And I love the resources page too, where we can actually ask questions. I didn't know that existed. So that's a really great thing to know, to ask experts too. So if you have any questions, please feel free to utilize the chat, or there's also the Q&A option up there as well too. I'll see them both. So go ahead and send some questions in on anything. I do have one question to start off today, Brent. We have a guest who is wondering, just kind of in general, do you find that doing some deer preventative measures will also help deter rabbits as well too?
So it really depends on what you're doing with it. So for example, if you're using a woven wire fence, and let's say it has, the squares are like 2 inches by 4 inches, so it's a fence made out of 2 inch by 4 inch squares, rabbits will go through that. So deer are much larger. To deal with rabbits, you need to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of what you're doing at the ground. So for probably 3 feet up, you need to have something that's more like chicken wire. They make rabbit fencing, and I find that the whole spacing on the typical rabbit fencing is also too large. It starts out really small at the bottom, gets larger as you go up. By the time it gets to the top, it's really too large, and you get rabbits that will jump right through that. But something like chicken wire is good. It's cheaper than hardware cloth. You can also get the hardware cloth, like the 1/2 inch or the 1 inch openings. But yeah, rabbits, you really need something at the ground level. You could try the electric fence option if you want to try that with the like 1 strand near the ground that's electrified and has like the peanut butter on it. And rabbits, they're curious. They'll come and they'll taste it and decide to go somewhere else. But really, what I do is I have the regular, like the wire 2 inch by 4 inch woven wire that I use for the main fence for deer. And at the bottom, I have chicken wire there. And because we have trouble with groundhogs, I also dug 1 foot down and then 1 foot out, and the chicken wire is underground there as well. So if they dig down, then they also hit it. And that works great for that, but it doesn't keep out the raccoons who come in for the sweet corn. So it's kind of a never-ending battle.
Yeah, lots of little critters want to eat our food. I don't know if you've heard of the groundhog Chunk of the family who created Chunk's own garden. It's very silly if you ever have time to Google it. It's adorable, but we'll move on to some other questions. Okay, so one other question we have is if there are any brand names of deer repellents that you might recommend.
Let me see if I can find it right here in my notes. So at the Lawn and Garden Show, there was another presenter who was talking about deer stuff, and there's a relatively new repellent that has come out, and it was effective 90% of the time. I don't think I got the name of it here though. I don't know the name of that one, but it's probably if you Google, well, I don't know, you Google it and you get all kinds of different ones. So all the products that I've used, they're all similarly effective / ineffective. Some work a little better than others, but they really need to be rotated, and they need to be used to train deer to get used to staying out of certain areas. Don't put it on everything where they really get used to it, but just the plants that you really want to protect. So I don't know the name of that one. If someone's really interested in that, I could contact the presenter from that other program and look it up and make that information available to you. Okay. But it is a pretty new product, and they're very excited about that 90% deterrence rate. We don't have enough information yet to know long term if you can just use that one repellent or we'll need to rotate through a couple of them. But it certainly is more effective than the other ones that have been trialed. So none of them are 100% effective, and that's something important to know. If the deer is hungry enough, it will eat anything. So what we're trying to do is give them the things that are less appetizing, and then make those additionally, even more unappetizing by using some of these repellents, and then using fences if we have to. Fences are not pretty, but sometimes you do what you have to do to protect the things that you really care about.
Sure. Great. Okay. Thank you. And I did write down that, get the participant's name that was interested in that, so I can follow up with her as well too, if we get that name. All right. Next question is, do you remember a particular spray as a repellent? Kind of along the same lines there.
I broke up there for a minute, but I think that's pretty much the same question, right? It's the main thing, and I know I keep repeating the same thing, but rotating through products. Like if you find one that you like and you just keep using it, the day will come where your prize plant will be gone. And that's because the deer, they simply get used to it. So you don't want just one product. You want to have a couple products that you're rotating through, and that way they don't get used to it. And again, using those smelly plants, that is helpful. If you've got some prize plants and you want to do some kind of border around it, like with some of those herbs or lavenders or anything in the mint family. Well, mint's kind of an aggressive spreader, maybe a bad choice, but But if you want to, if you can put some other things around there that have those strong smells, it can go a long way in keeping the deer out of that area. And that's the nice thing about flowers like that is you don't have to go out after it rains and spray them again, right? Because they're still producing that fragrance.
Okay, and that kind of comes into our next question. We had a participant who was curious about shaved soap, like Irish Spring, Dawn or dish soap, as repellents also. Is that kind of playing on the smell factor as well?
It is. And so the ones that have the strongest smell tend to be the most effective. These don't tend to be as effective as the commercial products, but if you think about it, like, how do you compete with coyote urine, right? So there's like, or dried blood, so, but yeah. And it takes quite a bit because it needs, just like with the lavender, I mentioned that you don't just plant a few plants, you really need to have kind of a small sea of them or a big border of them. So again, with these soaps, you're going to need quite a bit of it. And if you don't have that much, they'll just walk over it. So you have to think about making an area where as they're walking along, they're like, oh, this isn't good. Maybe I'll pass. And they walk a little further and like, oh, it's still here. They walk a little further and they're like, okay, I'm out of here. So that's quite a bit of soap by the time you reach that point.
Yeah. And this kind of goes along with the coyote urine question. We had someone just chime in about, what about human urine? Does that deter deer at all?
In the studies that have been done, because there were hunters that were talking about it and all that, it really doesn't. So human urine when it's been looked at has not been effective. So I don't think that they associate humans with predators who are going to chase them down like a coyote, even though we do have the hunting season. I don't know if they don't quite make the connection there, but no, it hasn't been shown to be effective.
Okay, great.
So you can keep using your toilet instead of
Right, that would have been such an easy solution.
Yes.
All right, kind of switching over to plants. One participant has a couple of questions. How much deer browse can an arborvitae tolerate? And the second piece of it is how to help a tree that has antler rub?
Good questions. I'll try to remember both of them, or you can remind me.
Yeah, I will.
So it depends. So if you have a small arborvitae or any small shrub that they like, and they defoliate it, then that evergreen is done. It won't recover from that. But if it's a taller plant and they're just eating off the bottom part and the top still has green on it, it'll be fine. So it really depends on what you're looking at. I don't know if I could put a real percentage on it. I would guess if they ate off 40% of the foliage, that it would still be fine. If they did that, they ate off 40% of the foliage every year, that's going to quickly deplete the resources. So I would say there's a good chance that your tree would be in pretty significant decline after 3 years or so. But they can take a fair amount. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to grow back where they browsed it. So that's the other thing. It may end up not looking like you want, and you might end up having to just prune off the bottom branches on that arborvitae, just give up on it and have it start, 5 feet off the ground. There's different ways to work it, but in terms of the plant recovering, if they've left the majority of the foliage and only eaten like 40%, you're probably fine. Or if there's plenty of new foliage up and higher up, then they're all right. Okay. And the second half was the deer rub. So yeah, it's tricky and people like to do different things to try to fix it. You really can't do a whole lot after the fact. There are some extreme measures if you ended up with one that was completely girdled, but typically the damage is on one side, or maybe a couple of sides, and the tree will typically recover from that. But it will also always have that injury site that's a little bit weaker. The wood will be a little bit weaker there. It's an area where it's more susceptible to insects and diseases getting into it. So you just have to keep an eye on it. So if it's like your fruit tree or something, just keep an eye on it, watch it, see how it does over time. And, in general, if it doesn't pick up insect or diseases through that, then it'll probably recover just fine on its own. But what you don't want to do, don't paint it with anything. Sometimes people try to do like grafts where you like, I mean, you could do this like if a tree is completely girdled, then it will probably die because the water only goes up in that outer part, just the outer part just below the bark. So if it's completely girdled, then your tree is probably going to die. But some people will do grafts where they'll take some healthy bark and the cambium layer, and they'll use that to build a bridge connecting the two areas, like a bridge over the damaged part to connect the bark at the bottom and the bark at the top. And I mean, those extreme measures can be effective, but for the most part, a typical homeowner is not going to be able to pull that off. So just watch it, keep an eye on it, and hope for the best. If you end up with an insect getting in there, then you could treat it at that point. Or if there's a disease, then you can look into what options there might be. But for now, you just watch it.
Okay, great, thank you. In regards to those plants that have the strong odors, are there any you would recommend particularly for shaded areas?
Not off the top of my head, and I'm a tree physiologist by training. So when it comes to specific individual like flowers and things like that, I'm not going to be able to give the best recommendations on that. There's certainly a lot of resources that are available online. There's specific, I was trying to think what the best ones are. There's like MSU. If you Google native plants MSU, then MSU has a website that will come up where there's a native plant selector tool, and it's super handy because you can put in some different things, like if it's in a shady area or whatever, and it will help you select plants for those spaces. And I think that would be a really good tool for picking up different flowering plants. And so that's probably the best I can do with that one, other than, again, to recommend that people use that Ask Extension tool. So go to the migarden.msu.edu and put in your question there, just like what you asked, and that will get routed to one of our experts. So probably someone like Rebecca Finneran out on the west side of the state, and she'll be able to give you a great answer for that. And that way we really get to leverage the different expertise that we have across Extension.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then one other question about mulch. Do you know if there's any mulch that have been that have odors to deter deer? Does that exist out there?
Oh, well, considering that they like cedars, you probably don't want to use cedar mulch. I have not heard of any kind of mulch like that. I will say with mulches, those invasive jumping worms have been showing up in some of the mulches that people are getting. So just be careful of your source. If you're bringing mulch in, if you're just getting like municipal wood chips or something like that, then you might be ending up bringing in these invasive jumping worms. And when you look through the mulch, you can't really tell unless you're trained. I mean, the eggs that come in, it looks kind of like coffee grounds, and you have to dig through there and know what you're looking for. So just be aware that if be a little selective on where you're getting mulch from. These jumping worms are spreading, and it's only a matter of time. They'll probably be everywhere, but we want to do our best to try to keep them as contained as possible. So yeah.
Gotcha. Great. Would you mind just giving me that MI Garden URL one more time so I can drop that in the chat?
Sure. It's MI, as in Michigan, garden.msu.edu. And you can always use Google. I usually just type in gardening in Michigan MSU, and it comes up that way as well.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're just looking to see if there's any other questions. I don't see any other additional questions. Let's see. Oh, one follow-up to the. Oh, so the question was to kind of just expand a little bit on your bee selective comment on where to get mulch.
Oh, okay. So if you're getting bagged mulch, for example, then you're probably fine. If you're going to like a garden center, if you're going to a large landscape supplier, then and they're a good one, just talk to them and say, hey, I'm concerned about these invasive jumping worms. I understand that they can be transferred in mulch. They're going to be pretty selective typically on where they get their stuff from. And a good place would be happy to talk to you about it and to explain what measures they've taken to ensure that they don't have it. But if you're going, like I know some cities or some, tree care companies will, they get like tons of these wood chips and they need to get rid of them. So sometimes they give them for free or you get them cheap or whatever. Those are where you want to be careful, because if they're just going somewhere random and they're chipping the stuff, then we are finding these worms showing up in it. I'm not sure exactly how they're getting in there because they don't live in trees. But I think what's happening is that they're making these big piles of stuff and then they're getting into it from out of the soil. So I suppose if you're doing like freshly chipped trees, like they just take a tree down, near your place or something, and you get the wood chips straight from that, then I would think that you would be fine. I think and I'm not positive on this, but I think it's going to be more related to piles that have been setting around and then people getting from those piles.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I don't see any other. Oh, I do see one more that just came in. This quick question is, when I do spray my new and young fruit trees, to avoid the insects that destroy, sorry, let me try that again. When is the best time to spray those young and fruit trees to avoid the insects that destroy fruit?
Oh, that's a totally different question. Okay.
Yes.
So we have entire spray schedules, and it's kind of a long conversation. It depends if you just have a few trees, what you're doing. There's a dormant spray that goes on before they leaf out. Probably the most important time is going to be when it's like an apple tree, for example. Once you've got the small fruit developing, is after the flower petals have fallen, because you don't want to kill pollinators. But when the first small fruits are developing, that's probably a good time to do a spray if you just want to do one spray. Somewhere after the petals have fallen and the fruit's starting to grow, and that will stop a number of the insects that will get into that fruit. But that's a longer conversation. And again, use that Ask Extension tool and ask that question, and we can connect you with a fruit educator and provide resources on what to use for that to minimize the number of sprays, but still kind of get the fruit that's not completely infested with maggots and so forth.
Right. Great. Okay. Well, I think that is our last question for today. Thank you so much, Brent, for being here, for sharing all this great information. And thank you to all the participants who joined us today. We do have this recorded, so we expect probably in the next week or so, we'll have this available should you want to review any of the information again. You can always reach me as well, too. I already had my email in the chat at karenp@hshv.org if you have any follow-up questions or need anything else. But thank you so much, Brent. We really, really appreciate everything today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed being here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Great. All right. Well, everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll hope to see you next month at our next Animal Hour. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.